So as I said, studying the basketball videos of when I was younger helps me immensely. And the thing is, like, what people don't understand is I wish I had more videos because even Michael Jordan, even Kobe Bryant, they weren't doing stuff that I was doing because I would do this skipping stuff. I did this one move on a video that I was lost on the day when 30 of my videos were lost, where I was dribbling and I did this like foot drag crossover, and I did that a lot where I would get holes in my shoes. And I wanted to study how I did that. Now, my grandpa and I think my dad and stuff think, well, you're just good if you just practice a lot. And no, you're good if you do the right form, and you do the right form through practicing a lot. Yeah, but if you're practicing picking the ball off a shooting machine, it messed up my form. It messed up all that stuff because the best shooters, the reason they're so good is because they move into it a certain way. And you do that automatically if you're just practicing natural. But I wasn't. Now, my grandpa tried to like discard what I was saying later, and he was like, well, Stephon Marbury, he shoots funny, but he still is a good shooter. And he was like, if you're in the flow, it shouldn't matter if you were shooting on the shooting machine. You'd still be a good shooter. Not really. I was picking the ball up, and then it messed up my mechanics. The reason I was such a good shooter was, as my dad said, he had me shoot sideways. But the reason I shot sideways was how I moved into shots. And picking the ball off a rack, I couldn't do that. So, but if I could study that, yeah, that would help because I could see I did stuff, and I'm not going to go into details, but even the players today don't do. That made me, I was considered by many the best shooter in the country, but where I would move into the shot, jump into the shot, and go back into the shot, and the way that I moved my feet on the approach, that's what made me such a good shooter. Now, even people like Stephon Marbury, they kind of, or not Stephon Marbury, my dad was, or my grandpa was saying, I forget the guy's name, but he played for the Suns. And he had a funny looking shot. And he's like, well, if he had a funny looking shot, you should have still had a good shot, even if you had a funny looking shot. It wasn't about it being funny looking. It was how I moved into the shot that made my shot good. And he moves into shots pretty correctly. But even me, like, if I could study what I was doing, I was better than them. I really was. My dad would know that. My grandpa wouldn't know that because he wasn't there. But I was considered one of the best in the nation, probably the best in the nation. And also, like, when I was 9, I was scoring over 30 points a game, won an AU national championship. And I had some videos that were just astonishing, me scoring like 30, 40 points. I was doing that every single game. And the moves I was doing these skip stuff, this stuff that you can't duplicate. Like, you could try to reproduce it, but you can't unless, and this is what my grandpa doesn't realize, it's like dance. You can do a dance move, but you have to do everything approaching it perfectly. My grandpa just thinks, oh, if you just shoot, no, it's about the approach. And people who dance, they know this. Like, you have to do every single thing the right way to get the dance move to do the accurate thing. Like that one move that I studied, I was trying to do that move where I would go like this and then go. And I was trying to mimic it, but I couldn't do it. But then I looked at a video and I was like, okay, well, dribble 2 with the right hand, then move to the left, and then do that. And I tried it, and I skipped into it the same exact way that I saw in the video. And I just did exactly what I saw, and then I did it. And I was like, okay, so then I started reproducing that stuff. But I didn't really figure out how to fix my shot until I was playing with Compton College, when I really started studying a lot of videos and doing exactly what I was doing moving into shots. So when I was playing in Kauai, when my grandpa saw me playing it, my shot was still messed up because I was still shooting with the way that my dad told me off the shooting machine with my feet the wrong way because I hadn't really studied the videos in depth. But I knew that the shooting machine messed up my shot. But it took me a while to figure out, oh, it's because of how I was stepping. I'm not going to get into details, but step back into it and do stuff like that, how I would move into it. That's when my shot really started getting better. And that was in 2019 when I was playing with Compton College. But that was when I really started like doing exactly what I saw in the videos and studying them in depth and slow motion and seeing exactly what I was doing. And it's what the best players do. But with the shooting machine, I couldn't do that. Now, regardless, I really wanted to get videos of when I was younger. It would help me a lot. But I'm telling my mom, can you, I want to be in Los Angeles. I don't want to be in Kauai, and I want to get videos. And can you guys, help out and not keep me here in Kauai and not, discard me and throw me to the side. And my mom's like, get over the past, you loser. And then she's like, I don't want anything to do with you. I just want you to be independent. Because that's what she thought my grandpa wanted. But my grandpa, again, he's like, well, I cast pearls of swine. She misinterpreted it. No. You also were trying to get me independent, and my grandpa thought I was crazy. He didn't know it was a shooting machine. I think that he also didn't understand the whole situation. He thought that there was probably something wrong with me, but he doesn't know if it wasn't for the shoot away machine, none of the problems would have happened. Everything would have been great. I would have been star basketball player. He's saying, no, you were just playing against bigger, better players. No, that's not true. I was bigger, better. I was a starting point guard on varsity as a freshman. The only thing that was messed up was my shot, and then my dad tried to fix it, made it worse. And then because I was still picking the ball off of the rack and I didn't know it, and things just deteriorated from there. But yeah, my grandpa, everybody just screwed me really bad in the whole situation. So all I'm saying is, I wanted to get more videos of when I was younger. And so, like I said, I screwed up, and I was, you know, at the time, my grandpa got me upset. He said that the Jews were parasites, and it got me confused. And I thought he was a white supremacist, and I got really into the communism, and I became very anti-white. And I think I saw myself more as Jewish and more person of color, so I was more anti-white, and I was that way my whole life. And so I was writing those ideas down on INTP Central and on Facebook, but my mom was hiding my stuff on Facebook. Then I was asking people for videos. Then my mom unhid all my stuff, and then the people who said that they had videos all of a sudden said they didn't, and I thought it was because of my communist ideas. And and originally I put up the communist ideas because I wanted people to see how smart I was and to think like, oh, he's very smart, very powerful, we should help him out and we should get him videos of when he was younger. But then I realized it backfired. But like I said, if I just had some freaking help, and my grandpa doesn't realize this, if I just had my mom and dad were talking to me, if I had some help, if I wasn't stuck on Kauai, all this stuff would not have happened. I would have continued going to school in Los Angeles, or I would have had some help and support in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't have, all this crazy stuff wouldn't have happened. And it would have been nice if my dad and mom could have helped me talk to people and try to get videos of when I was younger, but I was all on my own. I was overwhelmed. I had discovered the theory of everything, the quadrant model. I wanted to get it out. I wasn't getting help, and not just I wasn't getting help, I was being persecuted by my grandpa, who was making fun of it, by my uncle. It was a tough situation, and by my mom and dad. So anyways, but I was still a communist kind of leftist at this point. And like one thing, just like one example of that was I didn't believe in the afterlife. I didn't want to believe in the afterlife. And again, I kind of misappropriated my grandpa's teaching. So, I would be like, well, if you believe in the afterlife and you want to save yourself for the afterlife, isn't that self-confirmatory? Don't you want to transcend the self? But when I was on Kauai, I asked my grandpa this, and my grandpa was like, yeah, but the more you are in dualistic software, the harder it is in the afterlife, and that's what people call hell, to get free of the dualistic software. But again, he didn't teach me well at this point, and I was just confused. So I didn't understand what he meant by dualistic software and what he meant by the flow. So he's saying the farther you are from the flow, the more difficult it is in the afterlife to transcend the self, and that's what people call hell. So I was like, what? And then it started to confuse me. Now, again, I think a part of the reason why I didn't want to believe in the afterlife and stuff was because, again, I was kind of anti-white and anti-nationalism and anti-religion, and I thought that religion was a form of white supremacy, and it maintained borders, and it maintained stratification and division and stuff. And a part of that too, like I was a Marxist, and I thought that a part of the whole thing with the afterlife was it scared people to stay in their positions, to maintain the status quo, so they wouldn't shake things up and make waves, so that the status quo could be maintained. And I thought that maintained the divisions between white people and black people and the people of color and the lighter skinned people. And just an example would be like in Hinduism, where the Brahmins are the lighter skin and the lower castes are the darker skin, and the religion maintains the order, right? And that's the way I saw religion. I thought that it maintained division and separation, and that's why I thought people were Christians, because then they could validate, or they could justify division between the Muslims, who I saw as more darker skin. And so it maintained the national borders, and it maintained all that stuff. And I wanted race mixing. I was anti-white. So, I didn't like the idea of the afterlife. I was a Marxist. And, I tried to use my grandpa's metapsychiatry and be like, yeah, well, if you believe in the afterlife, that's self-confirmatory. And then you're focused on the self and you're not in the flow, because you're trying to save yourself for the afterlife. But there is no self. Everything is one, right, Grandpa? But my grandpa's like, well, but I didn't realize, because he didn't really teach me that well, that I was not in the flow. First, I was memorizing that. And I had an ego agenda still. I had a predatory stance toward the white people, and I was a Marxist. So I wasn't really necessarily in the flow, and my ego was still distorting my vision. I hadn't really transcended the ego so I could see things clearly. And it is possible that there is an afterlife. There is what my grandpa would say, like that difficulty of transcending the body afterlife, which could be what people call hell. So, I was starting to get confused. So my grandpa tells me this, and I'm starting to think like, well, maybe there is an afterlife. And then I start thinking, well, religion's accurate. And I start thinking about how, the people of color, they do tend to be more sexual and criminal and, have more quote unquote dualistic software. And I didn't really understand dualistic software at the time because my grandpa hadn't taught me well. So I was thinking like, well, maybe, race mixing is actually a negative thing, and it's going to send more people to hell, and it doesn't lead to good outcomes like I wanted it to. I thought race mixing, creating a race mixed society, the forecast society, and stopping the stratification by races and division by races and having everybody mix would create an ideal world. And I think as a Jew, I was anti-white, and that's a part of the reason why I wanted race mixing. But now at that point in Kauai, I started to question this, especially when I started thinking, well, is there an afterlife? Maybe the Orthodox Jews are right. And I didn't really understand the metapsychiatry aspect of it. So I'll get to that more later. But my grandpa would say like, yeah, Orthodox Jews, their rituals can help people get in the flow. For instance, following the Sabbath, then you're not just following your whims and following whatever you want to do, and following these rituals can help you to transcend the self and take you out of yourself. And also like just the metaphor of the Sabbath, like it represents the flow where you work hard on many days and then you let go, and then you can be open to inspiration. And just the act of following these rituals can open you to these insights and open you to the flow. But at the time, I didn't really understand all that. I learned all that much later. So at this time, though, I'm wondering like, well, maybe the religious people are right. And also I'm thinking, maybe, people do go to hell, and maybe the darker skinned races are more sinful, and what the Jews are trying to do, like the race mixing stuff is negative. And I started to think I was starting to think, my uncle was right. The white supremacists are right. I was like, does seem to be like a race mixing agenda, and it does seem a lot of Jews are behind it. So I was looking at like the music videos and seeing like I said, Miley Cyrus with all the black guys doing drugs, and like Migos talking about Versace, this like very materialistic stuff, like very anti-religious, very arrogant, and black guys with all these white women, and I'm seeing this race mixing, anti-morality kind of, I think, like Illuminati agenda. So I was starting to be like, whoa, and I was always like that. I always liked rap music, and I always liked, being against morality and all that stuff, because I tried to justify it with my grandpa's ideas, like, oh, it's closer to the flow because conformity is not the flow. But really, I had an ego agenda, and I was more just anti-white, and I connected whiteness with morality, and I thought that it was just a tool for white supremacy. And now at this point, I started to feel bad for white people, and I also started to think I started to be in Kauai. I started noticing that white people did have more swag flow, and I started noticing that even at UC San Diego, and I started just thinking my whole race mixing idea, yeah, there's an ego motivation behind it. And even my grandpa would say it's trying to force things, and I had maybe a nefarious agenda, that whole anti-white proclivity that I had. So I started to rebel against that, and then I started to become religious and more nationalistic, and I started propounding religion. And so I started making like posts of the music videos with the black people and doing the immoral stuff and being like, hey, this is against the Torah. So I started doing this online on Kauai, and I started to become more religious, and I started following the Sabbath and doing all that type of stuff, and being against the quote unquote race mixing agenda, the Illuminati agenda. But I'm going to get to that more later. But at this point on Kauai, it wasn't so explicit. I hadn't made it explicit yet. I just started becoming more religious. But I did start to recognize that there was a race mixing agenda, and started to rebel against it. And then I think that when that really took off, when finally I came back from Kauai and I came to Los Angeles. My mom said, do not come to Los Angeles. If you come, I'm going to make your life hell. But I came back, and I started staying with my friend Noah he was living in Oakland. He came to visit me, and I started talking to him, and I started to, because Noah was a communist, and we were best friends in college, and we were both communists. And then I started telling him I'm starting to question my whole communistic stuff. And I was telling him that I started questioning if the whole race mixing stuff is valuable. Like, I was like, maybe Abraham Lincoln was wrong in stopping the slavery. Like, maybe like Martin Luther King, maybe like segregation is what's best for people. And and it could be true. Again, my grandpa would say in the flow, there is no one answer, and you have to discern what people's software is. You have to discern all the variables and stuff. And sometimes, there isn't one answer, but, my grandpa would say like, you have to be in the flow. But also at the time, like, I didn't understand what he meant by the flow. And I kind of thought it was like a hippie thing, like a hippie leftist thing. But what my grandpa would say is the flow is like discernment of truth. And there's not always one answer. And sometimes division is okay. And sometimes you can transcend division, and it doesn't, there's not necessarily one formula. But at this point I was starting to become confused, and I was starting to move from being a left-winger communist for race mixing, anti-white, to being a right-winger nationalist, like Nazi, pro-white, and anti-race mixing, right? So I start questioning it. And during this time, I'm trying to talk to my mom and dad. I'm like, and I'm saying, I asked my grandma when I came back to Los Angeles. My grandma and grandpa from Kauai moved back to Los Angeles, and my other grandma was already in Los Angeles. And I asked her, can you talk to my mom and dad and see if they can talk with me? Because I have things I want to talk about, and I want to talk about the basketball. I want to talk about the shooting machine, and I want to make up, and I want to show them, like, if it wasn't for the shooting machine, all the bad stuff wouldn't happen. It's not something wrong with me. It was something wrong with the shoot away machine. It messed things up, and, stop throwing me to the side, and let's try to reconcile, and let's move on. But my grandma told me that my mom refused to talk to me, and she said that she doesn't want me to see a psychologist. She will not see a psychologist with me, and she wants me to see a psychiatrist. But I didn't have a mental illness, and even the psychiatrist would say that. But so at this point, I'm getting a little bit confused, and I want to talk to my dad. And I said, I'm trying to talk to some of my teammates from when I was younger, and now they're telling me that they don't have the videos when they said that they had videos of when I played when I was younger too. So now I'm thinking, like, maybe it was because I was a leftist and a communist and anti-religious, and they're more religious. And maybe if I become the opposite, maybe they will give me the videos. And and also, maybe through my immaturity, I thought, like, maybe if I become very powerful through this, I can scare them into giving me videos and stuff. But I was just so desperate to get videos of when I was younger, because people don't know how good I was. People don't know how much it helps me to study the videos. And, so I really wanted to get them. So then I remember I asked one of my friends, if he had videos, and he said no. And I started to think to myself, like, well, maybe if I become a right winger, then maybe my dad will talk to me, because I thought, he's kind of right winger, and maybe that will change things. And I remember I started watching, like, on YouTube, some videos by Maher Kahani, and he was like a nationalist Jew, and he thought that, Israel should just be for the Jews. And remember, I started becoming a white supremacist and more of a nationalist at this time, and I started questioning the whole race mixing stuff, and I was starting to think, like, maybe people of color are more sinful, and maybe race mixing is not ideal, and nationalism can be a beneficial thing. So I'm starting to think this way at this point. When I get back from Kauai, it's probably about 2014 at that point. So I was on Kauai for about a year. Then I got back, and I started to move from a left winger to a right winger. And the other thing, and I started becoming I went from anti-religious, and I started becoming religious. Like I said, when I was anti-religious, I believed in Freudianism, and I believed in Marxism, and I liked Freud a lot. And Freud said that the genesis of religion was just that there was a bunch of men, and they were all the sons of one man who was the alpha male, and that man had access to all the women, and all the women were all the other men in the tribe's mothers and sisters. And then they wanted sex with their mothers and sisters, but the alpha male wouldn't let them, so they killed the alpha male, who was their father. And then after they killed him, then they started worshiping him because they felt bad, and that was the genesis of religion. And that was the genesis of the worship of the Father. And I wanted to believe that because I wanted to destroy religion. I wanted to especially destroy Christianity, because I thought it was white supremacy. I thought it was white supremacist, and it maintained borders and maintained division, and I wanted race mixing. But then, like I said, I started to become a little more religious, and I started to want borders and stuff. So I started becoming more religious, and I started becoming more right-wing and more conservative. And I'll get more into that in a minute. But, like, one example of that would be, like, before, I didn't like the idea of IQ because I thought it was a white supremacist notion, and it was used by white supremacists to justify the superiority of white people through IQ. But then at this point, I started thinking, well, maybe IQ is valid, and IQ is an important thing. And so, So my point is I started moving from being left wing to becoming right wing, and I'm going to get more into that in a minute. And that's when I moved from Kauai to Los Angeles in 2014.